best place to share your true stories with the world, because this world is a strange one. Sometimes people aren't born healthy. They may appear fine, but inside their minds, something is wrong. Something is broken. They can't help it sometimes, but that doesn't mean they're not daydreaming of tearing you apart. Enjoy these allegedly true stories of asylums and insane people. Remember, you can use the links in the description to share your stories with me, and you can go to morbidmonsters.com for some creepy but awesome shirts. Real quick, here are the first 5 comments from my previous video. Slushy Snow says, "Shivers down my spine." It'll be hard to shiver down your spine when you don't have a spine. Actually, that doesn't make any sense. Ned Flanders says, "Why when I get in my house alone, do I just stare at the top of the stairs thinking I'm gonna see a demon pop their head out?" That's weird, Ned. Sounds like you have some trust issues with your house demon. I'm on good terms with mine. Ain't that right, Scott? Yes. Scott's a good guy. Luis Gutierrez says, "Hey, Darkness, I'm watching. I'm always watching." Rude. So you're always watching and you won't tell me when I'm burning my chicken nuggets. Craig says, "Broseph, Brody, Brokowski, Bro Creepy." My favorite is actually Botanical Gardens. And Ambit Gambino says, "I try to listen to your videos while I go to sleep, but that's not gonna happen with a thing under my bed." Well, Gambino, you're supposed to turn it off after you use it, otherwise it's gonna be vibrating all night. Now, let's get locked up with the crazies and enjoy these crazy stories. The following gameplay footage in the background is from a game called Too Dark from Gloomywood and Big Ben Interactive. To purchase and play the game, click the link in the description. Number 1. Mental Institution by Mariana. I'm 14 years old, and I was recently admitted to a psych ward due to depression and anxiety. When I first got there, I thought that I really didn't need to go. But as time progressed, I realized it was helpful. However, the help came along with a few consequences. As you may know, most psych wards are not as heavily monitored as they probably should be. This was proven to me during my stay. For a couple of days, things seemed to go without repercussion. I met people, became friends with them. I didn't really think much of anything. I was moved from one unit to another the first day, due to knowing someone in the previous unit. I eventually made friends with a girl whose name was Miranda. There was something strange about Miranda. She seemed to act out whenever she had the chance. I was talking to some other girls when they said that she acted up because she just didn't want to go home. One day, after a particularly tough day, I decided to stay back from dinner. We have recently had someone new come into the unit named Ethan. I immediately realized there was something off about Ethan. Of course, there's something off about everyone there, but even more so, you could tell more that he was possibly special ed. But still, there was something not quite right, especially compared to the rest of us. There's another boy who'd stay back that day for dinner as well, named Hunter. And what was truly wrong with Hunter, I'll never know. The things I found out that night send chills through my bones even still. That night, Miranda had a complete freak out. She went into one of the game rooms and blocked it off with the couch and other things. She began writing on the walls, "F the staff," over and over again. Eventually, we were shoved into the game room across the hall. The staff locked the door. They left us as they went to call a code orange or patient out of control. We sat there for what seemed like hours, when it was probably only around half an hour. But half an hour was too much with these types of people. They were terrifying. I decided to introduce myself to Ethan. He didn't really have that many friends here. He was new, after all. I asked him why he was there. It was typical for all of us to ask. I told him I was there for depression and thoughts of self-harm. He told me he was there because he was a pyromaniac, a compulsive liar, and that he was violent, and his parents kicked him out of his home. This was slightly scary, as I was locked in a room with him due to the other patient being out of control. Now, Hunter, I hadn't really gotten his story. All I knew was that he was a bit of a, as the saying goes, an F-boy. He seemed to have dated some girls in the unit. He was not allowed to be alone in the room with any females when the staff was not in the room with him, and he was specifically not allowed to be in the room with this girl because they were dating. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure that the best relationships don't often start in a mental hospital. So I didn't blame the staff, but because of this fact, I was even more uncomfortable with being left alone with him, especially considering the things he told me. He told me that he was there because he attacked his father. Not only that, but he had done plenty of drugs and was going to serve a jail sentence after this. This was progressively getting more and more creepy as we waited for the screams of the other patient to subside. Now, that's not even creepy, that's just one of the experiences there. But now this one girl that I'm about to tell you was frightening as hell. So, a few days after that, I seemed very comfortable. I was making new friends and inviting new people to share a room with me, as they were slowly running out of space. One day, the staff let me know that a new girl was going to be joining our unit. According to them, her name was, I don't quite remember it exactly, but I think it was Darian. Anyway, being a nice person, I decided to invite her into my room. I was already sharing it with two other girls, my friends Kate and Stephanie, but I decided that one more couldn't hurt. That was the worst mistake I made. Finally, the girl arrived. She had pretty dyed hair, but she seemed a little out of it. This wasn't uncommon, as most patients seem to not have the slightest clue as to why they're there, or what's going on. I went over to her and said hello, introduced myself, and told her that I'm her new roommate. I couldn't wait to share the room with her and all that. I asked her what her name was. She seemed to be kind of out of it, and not quite understanding what I was asking. Still, I wasn't quite sure. Maybe it was just a rough day for her. I decided not to jump to conclusions, but I was already beginning to suspect something weird. Later that night, all of us were trying to talk to her. We were trying to get why she was in the hospital at all. Eventually, Hunter came up to us and asked her name. This was after we were talking to her about why we were there, trying to get her to open up as well. In her confusion, she answered that her name was Depression. Of course, being stupid teenagers, we laughed at it, considering it a joke. Later that night, I was enjoying my first night as a level 3. Level 3s were allowed to stay up after curfew, which for this unit was 9 o'clock. This meant that I was allowed to stay up until 10. I was enjoying this new freedom when Stephanie came hurtling out of the room, screaming. She had tears in her eyes, and she was shaking. She said that Darian had stood up and flickered the lights, saying things about demons coming for Stephanie. This freaked out Stephanie to the point where she refused to go back into that room until Darian was removed. At that point, I was convinced that there was some psychological issues with this girl, majorly. I decided to talk to another girl and see if I could convince her to switch rooms with Darian. Thank the Lord she willingly agreed. That night, after this had all taken place, I was calmly reading a book by James Patterson that one of the people in the unit had let me borrow. All of a sudden, I looked up and saw Darian. She seemed mildly frantic, speaking about voices and hallucinations that she'd heard and seen. She was constantly talking about her father. Now, staff had no idea how to deal with this. Their idea of dealing with this was to lock her in the quiet room to get her to calm down. Now, I've had friends who have had auditory and visual hallucinations in the past. I managed to coax her to sleep. After this, however, I couldn't stop thinking about the things she'd said the entire night. I felt watched by the demons she spoke of, and I kid you not, I heard footsteps in the room when nobody else was awake, and I could hear something breathing right next to my bed. I didn't sleep at all that night, not after what I heard and felt. Things I've never experienced before. But as soon as Darian officially moved to another room, those things quieted down. It was like she came here, and she brought something with her. There were other creepy things there. For example, we had a daily goal, and this one girl, who was Spanish and didn't know much English, and the phrases that did come out were usually broken English. She worked on it while she was there, and she was doing fairly well. However, she had the same goal every day. It was to control the voices. I eventually figured out that she was having auditory hallucinations, and one day I walked in on her talking to them. That's unusual, sure, but it was the things she was saying, like, stabbed them all, cut them all, little pieces, little pieces. It was an experience that I'll never forget. I feel as though these experiences motivated me to try and get myself better, at least so I didn't have to go back there, ever, again. Number 2. Creeper in the Mental Hospital. Submitted by Anonymous. I was 14, and I was bullied a lot, so I started to feel depressed, which ultimately landed me in a mental ward. To be honest, it wasn't so bad there, but it's what I learned after getting out that made me wonder what people can really hide, what people don't show other people. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. It was around that time I was confused about my sexuality. So I would say that I was bisexual, though I realize now that I wasn't. Turns out a lot of girls in there with me were also like me, even my roommate, so that made settling in much easier. The first week of my stay was uneventful, but then we had a new girl come in. Her name was Mary. Mary didn't strike me as strange, probably because of where I was. So we became friends within a day, when we were allowed to go outside. Mary, along with some other girls, and I would talk to each other about whatever. Mary eventually asked me if I liked guys or girls, and I told her what I thought was right at the time, that I was bi. Soon after, she asked if I would date her. I had recently been dumped before I came here. Not to mention getting in a relationship in a psych ward. It didn't sound very healthy to me, so I wasn't really looking for a relationship. This is what I answered to her. I thought that would be the end of it, but every day she would ask me again, "Will you date me?" And every time I would say, "No, I'm just not looking for a relationship." By the third day of asking me at least 4 times a day, she began to ask instead, "Are you ready to date me now?" And again, I would tell her no. Thinking back on it now, I don't know why I didn't just try to stay away from her. Every day I would be asked the same question multiple times, always with her receiving the same response of no. Now, my cousin at the time worked there, as part of her nursing school. She was eventually assigned to Mary. I don't know exactly what for, but I do know that my cousin is now the only reason I know this, the only reason I know why Mary was sent to the ward. It was only after I left that I was able to know. Turns out, Mary would sneak into other girls' rooms in their homes while everyone was sleeping. She would take their used undergarments, wear them, smell them, take them home with her. It made me feel sick, knowing that I'd let her in my room back then, without ever knowing what she had actually done. Number 3. The Night I Nearly Died. Submitted by James. When I was 13, I lived in a small town in central Illinois, and I'm really into the paranormal. Me and a friend of mine named Dave went to a haunted house once. It was part of this old asylum in Pekin, Illinois. It might be somewhere else, but it was close to Pekin. That part I'm certain of. So before leaving for the haunted asylum, I was talking to this lady in her 40s about the place. She explained how her and her friend would always sneak in and smoke, drink, and enjoy their teenage selves. She also explained her paranormal experience. If I remember right, this is what she said. Me and my friend were just smoking and passing the time when we heard something. But being stoned out of our minds, we were panicking because we thought it was the cops. As we started to leave, we heard footsteps, and they were coming towards us. We all dead sprinted out of there, but of course, I got separated from everyone else, and couldn't find my way out. I heard my friend screaming, and out of nowhere, I heard someone screaming at us, a voice that sounded like it was above us, below us, around us, everywhere, all at once. It screamed, "Get out, now!" As soon as I heard that voice, I ran for the screaming of my friends, and I finally made it out of there. I didn't believe in the paranormal when I heard her story, and I thought she was just too high or drunk. Maybe she was hearing things, or had just made it up. Dave and I went back to our hotel where our parents were staying, but they would be out for the night and wouldn't be back until late. Dave and I discussed the story, and he also felt the same way, thinking that she was just making it up. So then we decided to go to see for ourselves. It was hard to get into. When we did get in, it simply seemed like a normal kind of abandoned asylum. Creepy, worn down, rusted, and empty. So we started to walk each floor, and nothing really happened. Now this is where it does get creepy. The only thing we had with us at the time were flashlights. We were getting ready to go up to the attic space when we began to hear running. Like little kids running around playing tag. Me and David looked at each other, both of us confused, thinking, why are there little children in this place, especially this late at night? Sure, I was 13, and I couldn't defend myself for that, so maybe it was other kids like us who were curious or using the place to play around. Then, out of nowhere, the running stopped. Still confused, I yelled, "Is there anyone up there?" Of course, there was no answer, but we did hear little kids laughing, and we heard them whispering to one another. So I decided to go up and have a look. Dave stayed back because he was beginning to get scared, ready to go. As I got up there, I saw a woman staring out the window. Confused, I went up and asked her, "Miss, what are you doing here with your kids?" Like I said, I didn't believe an ounce into the paranormal, and she said nothing. All she did was turn around and looked at me. What terrified me in that moment was when I saw her eyes. They were solid black, as if someone had plucked them out and spray painted over them, then placed them back inside. They were more like black marbles than eyes. Then, literally, like like a wisp in the wind. She disappeared. I remember stumbling backward, cursing under my breath. It was then I knew we had to leave. I went back and regrouped with Dave, and as we were leaving, I heard someone running towards us. This time, it wasn't the light pitter-patter of children's feet. It sounded more like a grown man or an animal charging at us. We both sprinted out of there. In my panic, I somehow lost Dave. I got confused and disoriented, and I think I ended up in the basement. I started to yell for Dave, but I don't think he heard me. I didn't hear him respond. Maybe I got too far away. It was then, in the middle of my panic, I heard someone coming down the stairs after me. I called back, trying to have a confident voice, but it barely came out as a whisper. Dave, is that you? Stop messing around, man. This is getting weird. I couldn't believe myself. I was starting to believe the story that a lady told us. There's no way, I thought. Haunted things aren't real. There's no such thing as ghosts. In the silence, alone with nothing but my inner voice, I heard someone else there. They breathed deeply and slowly. I ran out of the basement, up those stairs as fast as I possibly could. With what little breath and sanity I had left, I found Dave outside, talking to the police. I didn't care. I was just happy that we weren't alone anymore, that we were out of the asylum. Turns out Dave had waved down the police. They never found us. Dave simply thought that I got kidnapped or something. Needless to say, we both got in big trouble for trespassing. But again, at that point, we were just glad to be out. And luckily, they didn't tell our parents. Trust me when I say, that night, I could not sleep at all. All I could do was repeat that breathing in my head, the sound of something no longer human in that basement with me. Recently, I thought I'd forgotten all about it, until my parents wanted to tell me that the old asylum was finally torn down. Honestly, a part of me was glad that that happened, and another part of me was terrified, because that part of me was the part that never forgot what happened, and to this day, my memory of the place is as vivid as ever. When I'm having trouble forgetting what happened there, I have trouble sleeping at night, because every time I close my eyes, I'm there again, and it feels all too real. Number 4. The Forest Bunker. Submitted by Brooke R. When I was young, maybe 5 or 6 years old, I lived in a nice middle-class suburb. I had woods behind my house, but they weren't very huge, but they were still big enough to get lost in. I used to take walks with my mom out there, and one day, on one of those walks, my mom and I passed by a particularly large tree that we usually did pass by when we took our walks. This time, though, something was different. A blue plastic tarp hung down from it and along a couple of the low-hanging branches, forming a makeshift ceiling or wall. Beneath the tarp was some brush that had been piled up in some semblance of a bed. There were also several empty food cans lying on the ground. Now, these items on their own are not particularly weird, as it could have just been a homeless person camping out back there or something like that. That would have definitely been strange for a neighborhood like ours, but not exactly scary. No, the creepy part was when we looked higher up in the tree and found a pair of binoculars hanging from a branch. I don't think hobos need binoculars. As soon as my mom saw those binoculars, An obvious look of panic swept across her face. The branch with the device on it was right within view of our backyard. From our point of view, we wouldn't have been able to see the specific tree from the yard. But whoever was there, they could have easily seen us with the binoculars. My mom quickly led me home, and at the time I didn't really understand how scary the situation was. Several years after we moved out of the house, and when I was more grown up, my mom brought up the memory. "Do you remember that little fort we found in the woods that one time?" she asked. I took a second to think about it, just now realizing how weird that was. "Yeah," I replied. "That was really odd, wasn't it?" "Well," she went on, "I found out later that the man who had been staying there, the one with the binoculars, he had escaped from a mental institution and was hiding out in our backyard. A friend of our family had told us who it had been. Now I don't know if the guy was dangerous necessarily, or what he was doing with those binoculars, but I do know, with a setup like that, and a personality of someone who needed institutionalized, and someone who would have escaped that institution, I'm pretty sure that what he was up to was disgusting or disturbing, and to think I was that close to it, and I wonder to this day how close he actually came to me. Did he ever leave his tree? Did he ever peer into my window?" And number 5, Exploring the Abandoned Hospital, submitted by Celestia. Me and my best friend were always into horror movies and creepy stuff, so it was natural for us to want to explore such places in order to get some goosebumps and good scares. Most of our attempts were disappointing, because nothing really interesting happened. Once when I went to visit her in the city, where she studied back then, and while going to buy some groceries, we spotted a big abandoned building next to a hospital, and we decided to get close to see what it was supposed to be, or what it used to be. For some reason, we felt really drawn to that building. It was like the moment we saw it, we started immediately walking towards it. When we went to the fence that was surrounding it, we saw a sign saying that it was the old psychiatric ward of the nearby hospital. The building was abandoned, in ruins, and the sign said it could be dangerous to go inside, so stay away. But right next to the sign, either ironically or perhaps fate, there was a hole in the fence that would allow us to go in with ease. We left the shopping duties for later and decided to venture inside. I checked my phone battery to see how much juice for a flashlight we had. It was close to full, so we carefully went through the fence and we entered the ground floor of the place. It was full of wrecked items, shattered glasses, abandoned old wheelchairs, and all sorts of trash. Some of the doors were missing, so you could peek inside some of the rooms. There was a staircase to the second floor. We decided to take it since the ground floor was full of the stuff I noted above. During this time, I was holding the flashlight and pointing it in every direction, because my phone was the only source of light we had. Nothing happened on our way to the second floor, so I thought it was probably a waste of time, that this abandoned hospital would be another letdown. But the moment we set foot in the second floor, we immediately heard what sounded like breathing, or perhaps a breeze coming through the building. It was creepy and interesting enough to keep us going. I looked to my right, and I saw a door leading to a pretty big room, but I couldn't see what was inside from that angle, so I decided to move forward to check it out, but I tripped on some weirdly placed bricks in front of the door, and that's where something very weird happened. Suddenly, my phone started flickering and stopped working altogether. It didn't turn off, because there was no shutting down sounds or the Samsung logo, which it usually shows when it turns off. So we were left in the darkness in front of that door. I tried to turn on my phone again several times as the panic was slightly taking me over. The phone didn't respond at all, and the creepy sounds started getting louder, which it might have been my imagination from being scared, but maybe not. But I told my friend anyway that it was time to go. We began to stumble downstairs, as it was difficult to see without a light. I continued to try to turn my phone on, but still, there was no response from it. As soon as we made it outside, my phone turned on without any action on my part. It was like it wasn't off at all. The screen just lit up on its own, and everything was normal again. After that, we called it a night, and we headed back to the dorms. A couple of days later, my best friend and her boyfriend were supposed to meet at the city. When we meet up with him, we tell him the story of the abandoned hospital, and he was immediately intrigued. So we persuaded him to go together with us back to the place. I was both excited and nervous about going back. We waited until it was dark, then we headed there. This time, we all had our phones completely charged, with the flashlights ready to go. Everything was pretty much the same on the first floor, but yet again we didn't really explore it too much. We headed straight for the second floor with him in the front, and me in between them, the safest spot in my opinion. When he reached the door on the second floor, the one we couldn't get past before getting too scared to continue, he stopped. "Didn't you say the door was open?" he said. I found that super weird too, so I rushed forward to see what he was talking about. The door was sealed with bricks that weren't there before. I was shocked. Why would anyone need to seal a door at an abandoned hospital with bricks? It was open just 2 days ago. That really got us confused and creeped out. We wondered if somebody saw us going in and decided to brick it up. But the question was, for what purpose would someone do that? What was beyond the wall? I truly regretted not seeing what was past there the last time. We continued to move down the corridor. The walls and ceiling up here were a bit swollen from the moisture. It created some weird shapes over the walls, adding to the atmosphere. At the end of the corridor, we saw staircases going up and down. The upper one seemed unstable, not a good idea, so we decided we could look around the first floor in more detail. We went down the stairs, and then just when we were about to step onto the first floor again, my friend told us to stop and to remove the flashlights. The command was so sudden, we did it quickly and trembled a bit. I looked at her and she was staying close to the wall that created a corner with the other wall. She was peeking slightly over to the corner. I'll be honest, I didn't quite like the idea of staying in the dark with so many open doors in an abandoned ward. I kept an eye out for movement, but it was almost impossible to tell in that kind of darkness. But I didn't stop myself. I wanted to be aware of any sort of surprises. Then suddenly my friend told us to move back to see if there was another hole in the fence that we could use to escape. We didn't even need to hear her warning not to make noise while looking. We did it immediately, keeping as quiet as possible. But we couldn't find another way out. I realized by our position that my best friend was looking straight to the hole in the fence, which was the only way out. After several minutes of staying put there, she turned around and told us to make a run to the hole, and we were happy to do it after staying there for so long in the dark. We went outside, and she told us to head straight to the dorms and to get our baggage. She didn't talk for a while, but she was looking backwards constantly, like she was afraid of seeing something. We continuously asked her what happened, until she finally told us. She said in the hallway downstairs, she saw a shadow of a really tall man, or what she thought was some man. It was too dark to tell for sure. By her words, the shadow just stayed there facing our direction, and didn't move at all. It just stayed there for so long, staring at our direction, and she told us that she had the feeling he was looking straight at her. By her words, after the whole time we stayed in the dark, she decided to look back to see if we were still there. Because staring at the shadowy figure, she said that time seemed to fly by. On our way back to our hometown, we kept on talking about it, but nobody could find any reasonable explanation for anything that happened. Who was the Shadow Man? What did he want? Why was there a brick wall where there wasn't one before? To this day, I still want to know what they're hiding back there, and why they haven't demolished the building. Something tells me that there's something hidden in that place, and that building has a terrible history. It would be terrifying to be locked up in an asylum. I've always been scared that if I were to ever be locked up myself, they would never let me out, always coming up with lies or fake reasons that I needed to stay. Or maybe not so fake. After all, we might all be a little crazy. That's what makes people so scary, our capacity to commit untold atrocities to one another at any time without anyone ever suspecting a thing. Behind our smiles, we can hide truly abominable desires. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Check out Too Dark with the link in the description if you want to play the game. And remember to share your stories with me using the links in the description as well. Thank you for listening. As always, stay safe out there and stay creepy. I decided to invite her into my room.
No, I do not. Oh my god. No, that would be really funny though. Oh no, it could just be me. drawing is taking forever. Yeah. Okay, I'm almost done with the coloring. It's got to do their guitars, the drum set, and everything else. Which I don't even know what color I should make it. Electric. Enigma. Sure. Go ahead. Call me, friend. Getting a hamster today. Yay, yay, yay for me. Flan. Flan. Oh, Flan. Oh, okay. Think your phone's acting up. No. Hello. Hello. Is it even working? Probably not. Oh, I suck this on empty. Okay. You do that then. Will these badass guitars. Favorite color? Blue. Electric. I really like this color. I'm not sure. Hello. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Because I'm recording. I know. I'm getting a hamster today, and he's ugly as fuck. I think. At least that's what I've heard. I don't want to be mayonnaise. It's probably mine because I'm recording. Like, I can hear you. You just can't hear me. I'm just kidding. So, one day, I went to this club, right? Okay. And at this club, there was a dead body on the floor. I'm trying to get off to do a club. But I don't even know what color drum sets are. This is it, right? This will work. Yeah, nah. Do a purple line, a blue line, and a red line. And then a blue line. I don't have Skype on my phone. One, two, three. No, I don't. I thought you knew that. I haven't. Don't ever use it anymore. I'm never on Skype to use it. It's disgusting. No, it's not working because I'm on an app. I can hear you. Just nay. Like I want to, but it's not gonna work because the audio of my voice is being used for the live stream. But I found you, bitch. Okay, I will go and download Skype then and use it more of my freaking data. Ew. Ew. Or, you could have just stayed over instead of go back home.
You been up this whole time?
No. I woke up at 9. Hey, Mom. When is she coming?
I don't know. I just woke up. You can text her.
Okay. Yeah.
You talk to your mom about things.
Come here, baby. Come here, Jay. Get up here. Come on. Up here. Come on, Jay. Come here. Come here. Come here. Come here. Hi, baby. Hi, baby. What are you doing? 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 Did you eat Stormy's food last night? Okay. Yes, yes, give me a second. Thought. Eh. You hear me now? Can you hear me now? Yeah. Because I'm on a live stream. It is on. Don't wanna get technical. What is this? Oh, this is for tail. Should be fine. Okay, for you.
I'm from the South. Arkansas, to be exact. And let
Okay.
are worse things to fear than Florida Man. This is Darkness Prevails, the best place to share your creepy true stories with the world, because this world is a strange one. Tonight, we're looking at some of the creepiest true or allegedly true stories from the South. You know, the states where people joke that cousins are a little too close, where everyone has tons of firepower stashed away, where, apparently, some of the most horrifying things go down. Remember, you can always share your stories with me using the links in the description, and be sure to check out morbidmonsters.com for some creepy cool shirts. And real quick, here are my favorite early comments from my previous full video. Tanner Titan says, I don't like my house anymore now. Well, that's too bad. You're gonna have to live there until you move out. Until then, you might want to sprinkle some salt around your bed. Little Miss Chatterbox says, I've never been inside a haunted house. Now I most definitely won't. That's probably a good idea. Ghosts don't make very good company. Jameer Cards 27 says, could we please get a full version of your outro song? Sure thing. Just click that download link in the description. You're welcome. Anthony Styles says, I'm surprised Luigi's Mansion wasn't on here. That's just great. Now I'm going to be playing GameCube games for the next week. Nostalgia. And Nick says, the Valentine's Day special should be interesting. Yeah, because I definitely didn't forget about Valentine's Day. Guys, I'll give you $5 not to tell my wife. Alright, now let's head south and see what horror...
Oh my god.
And see what horrors we stumble upon. Number 1. Old Land. Submitted by Chris. Chris B. I live on the outskirts of a small city in southern Alabama and have lived here my entire life. Most of my family, at least my Creek Seminole ancestors since pre-Civil War era, have also lived in the region. That's southeast Alabama and southwest Georgia. The land I live on was actually part of the trail that Hernando de Soto and his men took from Mobile, Alabama, to the east coast of Georgia, which might be a cause of some of this activity. I will try to keep this short, because I still have paranormal experiences from time to time, but I'll include the stories that I believe have Creek or Seminole ancestry. At least, I believe they do, anyway. When I was around 4 years old...
Oh my god, I'm gonna kill myself.
My dad and stepmom were dating. At this particular part of the story, she spent the night, and we shared the couch together. I woke up in the middle of the night to see a man. Seeing a stranger in our home, I immediately covered my face with my blanket and waited for a bit, but the man never left. He continued to stare at me. He looked a lot like me. I sat up in my spot on the couch, still a little afraid, but I pointed at my nose and to his, gesturing in a way that asked a question. Do I know you? Are we related? The man's...
Okay, so I shake my phone and it stops.
Smiled at me. Then slowly faded away. After this experience, I told my dad about it, and later on in life I met someone who looked exactly like this man. One of my half-Sioux cousins, who I didn't meet until much later in middle school. After this experience, my parents had a priest come to bless our house, which did nothing, at least for me. The activity continued, and sometimes got much more dark, as I consider that one a pleasant experience. The activity got so common around me that I became used to it, but there would be more creepy experiences to come. One of my last experiences with the spirits of my Creek Seminole ancestors happened about a year ago. We were camping at a nearby park, about 50 yards away from a burial mound. And this is what happened. I was in my tent. My eyes were closed and I was trying to sleep, but I could see through my shut eyelids the light from a fire, which was supposed to be out already. When I opened my eyes, I could see a weird sight through my tent walls. They were thin, and what I saw outside was casting large shadows over my tent. It was people dancing around a fire, a huge fire, much larger than the fire pit we created on this camping trip. I slowly peeked outside. There were silhouettes bounding around in circles around the campfire. And even better, beyond the campfire, where the lake was when I fell asleep. The lake was no longer there, and the other tents that were beside me, along with the people in them, they were gone. It was as if I went back in time to witness this ritual, before the landscape had been changed. Steadily and quietly, I crawled back into my tent, slowly zipping the tent back up before crawling into my sleeping bag. I wasn't sure if I was afraid or paranoid. I didn't want to make a sound or gather the attention of those dancing outside. They might not have meant me any harm, but when you find yourself in a situation that doesn't make any physical sense, everything seems a little eerie. After getting back home from that camping trip, it was easy to see that the paranormal activity in my own home, which is technically on the same property, had increased. I would see shadows around the house and at night, and electrical appliances would have anomalies, such as turning off and on by themselves. This never happened before. You might be thinking that none of this sounds very scary or dangerous. In fact, it might even sound cool, but that's not the climax to these experiences so far. You see, one day I was playing around in the attic, up in the rafters like I often did. Little did I know this would turn into a day that I would never forget. As I sat there on one of the rafters, I saw a shadow moving around to my left. It was behind me, but I caught a glimpse of it before I could react to what I saw. I felt something's hands on my back. It pushed me forward violently, with the force of a grown man, and I mean as hard as they possibly could. I fell forward, screaming, and in seconds, I fell in pain onto the sheetrock below. I was crying, and I had to be rushed to the hospital and have surgery. I ended up fracturing a few vertebrae, and I was told not to play in the rafters anymore. No one believed me, even when I told them that it wasn't me, that I didn't fall off. I was pushed by the thing in the attic. These accounts I have usually make people feel uncomfortable around me and my home, and it does make people think that I might be crazy. But I'm telling you, the land I live on is very active with both good and bad entities. This land is rich with heritage, history, and spirits. To this day, I still get the worst feeling when I see the hole in the ceiling from which I fell. One day, I hope to set up a bunch of cameras and audio recorders around the house, just to prove to myself and others that this isn't just me playing pranks or being superstitious. There's something supernatural going on here. Sometimes it's pretty cool and peaceful, yet other times it's terrifying. Number 2. In the Woods of Louisiana. Submitted by Johnny. I remember my childhood very clearly. I remember the huge Victorian-style home that I grew up in. It was in a big patch of woods in northern Louisiana. Most of the trees were very tall pine trees. I remember they smelled so sweet. Our house was about 5 miles away from neighbors on all sides, and the only way to reach it besides a trek through the woods was a tiny dirt road that led from the main highway to our house. It was an absolutely beautiful setting for a beautiful home. The sun would burst through the trees, and now that I think about it, even during the height of Louisiana summer or the middle of winter, the area always felt as if it was fall. Maybe a solid 68 degrees all year round, which is strange, really. I was a rambunctious child, 8 years old at the time, with a huge imagination. This huge imagination would be the explanation given to me by my mother when I told her that there were children living in the woods around our home. I've only ever spoken of this to my mother, and even now, writing about it, there are memories flooding back to me that I have somehow completely erased. There were vampires in those woods around my home. I'm sure of it. One bright but cool August day, I decided to play outside with our husky puppy, Marcella. We called her Marcy. My mother gave me her usual stay close to the house and don't go into the woods warning, and I bolted out the door with Marcy. My mother always reminded me that there were black bears in the woods, and to never go farther than the edge of them, which literally surrounded our entire house, besides the small dirt road. I remember seeing at least 2 black bears, but that's beside the point. Marcy and I were playing fetch one day with an old baseball that I had, and my last toss was a little too hard. The ball whizzed past Marcy and rolled into the thick woods behind my home. Marcy ran for it, but stopped dead in her tracks, right at the edge of the brush, and began to snarl. The hairs on her back stood up, and I remember being filled with a sense of panic. "Marcy, what's wrong?" I asked. Right after I spoke, I heard a snap in the woods, and fear took over me. I screamed for Marcy to come back, and ran for the door to my house. Right before I closed the door, I saw the baseball roll back into my yard from the woods. After that, I didn't go outside for a while. After a few days of hiding, my mother convinced me that it was probably an animal, and that it was long gone by now. I remember the feeling of dread and panic that came over me, and the deep growls coming from Marcy. That was no normal animal out there. Being a bored child, though, I decided to venture back into the yard. My grandfather was a huge gardener, and I collected seeds and small tools from him on my yearly visits. So I decided to make a small garden myself. It was about 5 in the afternoon, and I knew the sun would be setting about 2 hours from then. I found a small patch of flat yard next to the tree line behind my home, and I began digging small holes to plant lily bulbs. I became so caught up in gardening that time seemed to move faster and faster. Before I knew it, the sun was setting and twilight was approaching. As I realized this, I began to collect my tools and leftover bulbs to put them away. Just as I grabbed the last tool and turned to walk away, I heard what sounded like a child's voice. "Hi," said the voice. It came from the woods right behind me. I snapped my head around in surprise. "Hello?" I asked. "Hi," I heard, just as I saw a small girl peek around a thick pine tree. She looked to be around 6 or 7 years old, with long, ratty brown hair and dirty skin. She looked as though she'd been walking the woods for weeks. I remember her so clearly now. I remember her facial features were almost elf-like. She had a small nose that came to a point, and even smaller ears. Her eyes were almond-shaped and slightly upturned. Her fingers were a bit longer and skinnier than they should have been. She was wearing tattered clothes that I didn't think were strange at the time, but now that I think back on it, were almost pilgrim-like. Out of all of this, though, I will never forget her eyes. The iris of her eyes were a shade of gray, so light that they were almost invisible. They were striking, almost ghostly, and when she moved into the shadows cast from the tree, they seemed to glow. I think the term reflect is better. They were reflective like the eyes of a cat or raccoon. Right when I looked into them, the same sense of dread and panic filled me. I began to quiver. "Stop that," she said, with adult authority. You scared me," I said. "Who are you?" "Constance," she answered. She smiled at me, but it was cold. "I'd never seen a child like this." "Why are you in the woods?" I asked her. I knew there were bears, and I didn't want her to get hurt. "I live here," she said, as she turned away and skipped through the trees out of sight. I was confused and scared, so I ran back inside to tell my mother. Of course she didn't believe me, and told me that I must have imagined it. I think imagination is a crutch used by parents to explain things away that scare them, especially when it involves children. I remember after I told my mother, she went outside with her rosary and prayed over the yard for a bit, so I knew she must have been a little afraid. Despite telling me it was my imagination, she was still cautious of what I said. That night, as I was trying my best to fall asleep, I heard a tapping on my window. It was around midnight, and when I turned on my lamp, I saw the same girl from the woods just outside my window. She was standing there like she was waiting for me to open it and let her inside. My room was on the second story of the house, and there was nothing there for her to stand on below the window. "What are you doing?" I asked, startled. "Do you want to see my house?" she asked, with the same cold smile. In the light of my lamp, her eyes looked animal-like, hungry. "Get out of here," I said, with as much authority that a scared 8-year-old boy could give. I was very afraid now, and I was beginning to cry. "Tell me I can come in, or we can play with your toys and bring them to my house. My family is very nice, but we're awfully hungry." "Get out," I said again. She leaned closer to the window, and that's when I saw her teeth clearly. I'd somehow never noticed them while she spoke, but they seemed to change when she said the word hungry. They were sharp, not like horror would be sharp, but sharp enough to puncture what they'd been into. They were all that sharp. My eyes grew wide, and I began to scream for my mother. "Let me in! Let me in!" The girl screamed as she hit my window. I was now screaming in terror as my bedroom door flew open. My mother rushed inside and turned on the light, and there was nothing in my window. I told her what happened, and she said that I probably had a nightmare about the girl. But right as she was saying that, I saw what looked like Constance looking up at me from the tree line. I saw those reflective eyes of hers, then saw 2 more pairs of reflective eyes. Those were at a much higher height than hers, as if they were from adults. While my mother was trying to calm me down, she said that we were going to visit my aunt and cousins the next day. What she didn't tell me was that she had lost a house, and she was actually bringing me to stay with my aunt while she moved our things from the house to our new place. The next day, as we were loading some bags into the trunk, my mother told me that we were going to bring Marcy with us, and that I should go get her. I found her in the backyard, snarling into the woods. I called her over, and we quickly ran to the car. As we drove off, I looked back at our old home, and I swear I saw those eyes. 3 pairs of eyes staring at me through the trees. When my mom finally explained that we weren't going back, I was very happy. My mother said I even looked relieved. I'll never forget those eyes. Sometimes I see them in my dreams. I still wonder what would have happened if I had opened the window for Constance, and I still shudder at the thought of being so close to her in my yard. I know that they were vampires. They had to be. Number 3. My experience with Goatman's Bridge. Submitted by Brandon G. I used to be hardcore into the whole paranormal thing when I was a child, but like most people, I would grow out of it as I got older. But a trip to Denton, Texas would open my mind back up to the idea that there are things that just cannot be explained. I lived in Plano, and have a pal who would often go exploring places in the DFW area. Parks, creeks, even a few abandoned buildings. My pal Kath decided to ditch the normal routine of exploring the usual and brought up the old Alton Bridge in Denton as a spot to check out, and said it was supposedly haunted and had, well, the Goat Man there. I laughed and asked why would a dinky old bridge be haunted, and that's when she explained to me the man who was killed and hung by the KKK, only to find that the noose they threw over the bridge with the man had nobody on it, and they never found the body. This man was the Goat Man, as he herded goats. The local legend says that the Goat Man chomps through the woods. I scratched my head at the two stories. After all, it's a bit odd to have two different kinds of spooky activity going on at the place. So I said, what the heck, let's go check it out. Now this is where it gets a little goofy, but then a little weird. I have a set of stormtrooper armor from Star Wars, and I figured we could take some cool pictures in the area while we were at it. So imagine me in this plastic getup walking with Kath, checking the place out. It was pretty much empty when we got there, so we started going over to the bridge. It had a lot of graffiti on it, and most of it was pretty strange. Things like, "Kill yourself now. The Goat Man is watching. Oh, Goat Man, save me. Sacrifice yourself to him." I figured it was just some edgy kids being, well, edgy. So we walked across the bridge, not noticing anything out of the ordinary, and went our way into the woods. It was then halfway through our walk that looped us back to the entrance of the other area of the bridge, when I felt a strange feeling. Like I was all alone, despite having Kath with me. It was like there was a presence there that you couldn't see. It was odd, but not unnerving enough to make me want to turn back. I took off my helmet and looked around, before taking a deep breath and huffing it out. Kath asked me if anything was up, and I said nah, and put the trooper helmet back on. I still felt watched, but kept going through the trail. Here and there, though, I started feeling that unnerving feeling grow, slightly more and more as we walked. It was strange. Whatever was making me feel this way, it seemed to be following us. Maybe Goat Man had never seen a plastic man before, I thought to myself. Me and Kath made our way through the rest of the trail, and I could see the trees thinning out. I then decided for some reason to look down and check for mud on my boots, when I noticed a few noises around us. Faint sound. Of tree branches being moved. I looked around and had to take my helmet off again to see and get a better look. Kath asked me if I heard that. I did, and we stood there for a good 5 minutes looking around, trying to find out where the noises were coming from. Kath asked if I wanted to get back moving, and I decided to hang around another minute, before checking to make sure the costume parts were all secure on me. Then we moved forward. As we got to the end of the woods, it was when I suddenly felt super creeped out, and I felt something gently push on the back plate of my chest armor. "What the?" I said. In a raised, confused tone. Kath was in front of me, and asked me if I was alright, as I spun around bringing an arm up to try to touch whoever it was that touched me. But there was nothing. Nothing was there. I felt myself get goosebumps and my hair stood on end. I asked Kath what the heck just happened, only for her to reply that she had no clue. I took my helmet off yet again, and carried it in my hands the rest of the walk home, both of us looking pretty darn confused. Neither of us said a word as we went on our way to the rest of the trail and to our car. I took my gear off and hopped inside, thinking that that would be the end of it. But the weirdest part was yet to happen. I got home and later that night went to bed pretty late, around 3 in the morning if I recall. I fell asleep quickly, but I got woken up wide awake by a hard slamming on my bed, as if someone had slammed their hand down on my bed as hard as they could. I usually sleep facing the wall on my bed, and I was frozen stiff when that happened, too scared to look over to see what had done it. I stayed still, not moving an inch until the shock wore off. Then I jumped out of bed, scrambling to turn on the lamp by the bed. There wasn't a trace of anything, or anyone. Nothing. Zilch. It's been a year since this happened, and I still can't come up with an explanation. But I'll tell you this, I do believe in the paranormal now. There are some things you can't believe in until you experience it yourself, and I'm somewhat grateful I haven't had another encounter with whatever it was that decided to follow me home from Goatman's Bridge. Number 4. Urban Exploration Experience. Submitted by Bobby. A few weeks ago, me and 3 of my friends, Kyle, Andy, and Max, went to 4 abandoned houses. Now, Andy, Kyle, and I had been planning this for at least a month, and we gathered a lot of supplies, and Andy got a new camera just for the occasion. We live in Georgia, and we decided to meet up at Nash Farm Battlefield at 7:20 p.m., and we all piled into Kyle's Jeep. On the way to a neighborhood across from the first house, we talked and cut up like any teenage boys would do. Kyle and Max made sure we knew the way to walk to get to the other 3 houses, and then told us what we planned on doing. So once we parked the car and we ran to the first house, we walked around to the back, and we entered through the garage. The first house wasn't very creepy until we went into the attic and saw a toy tractor. The moment I touched it, we all got a bad feeling, and we left shortly after that. On the way to the second house, I got caught in a bushel of thorns. After my friends helped me get pried out of it, I was already wanting to go back, but I didn't tell them that. The moment we set foot into the second house, we were all immediately creeped out, because on the wall right in front of us, shown by my light, there was graffiti on the wall, a spray-painted smiling face with the words next to it that read, "Get out now." Being the 2 superstitious people in our group, me and Max left, but we had to wait outside for Andy and Kyle. Soon enough, they followed us out. We began arguing about going back into the house, and how the words were not a request, but a command. I figured it was better safe than sorry to move on, but they said they weren't ready to go and wanted to explore more. We ended up going in again, only to find something just as creepy. Another illustration on the wall, of 3 stick figures. They looked sad as if they had been left behind, and right above it were more words saying, "Leave now." Me and Max once again walked out, and this time refused to go back in. We just had a terrible feeling about this place. So we headed to the third house. Finally, this one didn't really have a creepy vibe to it. All that was there was some leftover underwear, and some footprints leading to the crawl space. The next
Okay, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.